What's up, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of the 5280 podcast on the MHRT Network. I am your host, Mundungus, alongside with my co-host Cameron Parker and Glenn Hauser. And Gage Madrid will be here later after he readjusts his priorities. He'll show up, and then we'll be a full crew. How's everybody doing tonight?
Confused.
Yeah, doing well, but I mean, confused, especially with the news that just broke. Should I say about 10 minutes ago? we'll talk about that later. Yeah,
no, it's been a crazy day. Teams are cutting all the rosters down. Are the Broncos at 53, or do we still have some more cuts to go?
They haven't actually. They're one of the teams that hasn't actually announced their 53 yet. I guess there are 4 teams that fall into that, including the Ravens and the Broncos. So, not entirely sure, Mike. I thought they were pretty close, and then we found out, like 6 more guys were dropped. So I'm not sure.
Well, The first thing that I want to talk about, I don't think we talked about it last week because it happened after, but Jerry Jeudy, his hamstring injury, he's going to be out 3 to 5 or 4 to 6 weeks.
We'll just say 4 to 6.
4 to 6.
But the news came out today to further that. The news came out today that Jerry Jeudy will not be on short-term IR, which means that he's not going to be on long-term IR either. So it falls in line with the stuff that they were talking about, which is week 1 is a possibility. It's unlikely, but it's still a possibility that he also may be available for week 1. That said, though, Jerry Jeudy's a clown. He tweeted like that day when he was injured, the laughing emoji, and who knows what that was, in correlation to. So hopefully, that was in the injury news and everything. I will say though, a really famous person on Twitter mentioned about Bo Lowry and the success of everything with the hamstrings and stuff like that, and how in a lesser degree hamstring, players have actually come back much sooner than the expected, what the actual expectation was. So it's certainly possible that Jeudy's injury is minor, but it is certainly best case scenario, all things considered.
And when you call him a clown, you're saying he's joking around. You're not.
Oh, for sure. Besides, if I did call him a clown, my buddy at Predominantly Orange, Jordan Lopez, will be coming from my head.
So let's get into one thing before we get into all the roster cuts. Has to do with the roster, but it's not technically a cut. The Broncos technically have made 2 trades, but we'll start with 1. So they released Brett Maher and traded for Will Lutz from the Saints. Why? I don't get it.
First things first, I wish they would have kept with Maher. I really wish they would have kept with Maher. It's unfortunate, that in this day and age, in this day of the business, that one bad game, one bad playoff game is not enough for you to be staying on an NFL roster. But if you look at his stuff historically, he's been a 90% or rather consistent kicker in his career. So it is a little bit interesting that the Broncos decided to go with this route and trade. And I want to make things certainly clear here. When I say I hate this in terms of the trading for the trade, it's like I'm not actually saying I don't hate the idea of bringing Lutz in. I hate the idea of trading for a kicker. Like, kicker is a pretty easily replaceable position, and you should be able to just pick one up off of the waiver wire or bring Elliott Fry back. But it certainly seemed like maybe Lutz was always in the cards for Sean Payton, right? But the one thing I will say to tie a bow on all of this is I will say I love the fact that the Denver Broncos are bringing in a player that is familiar with both Sean Payton and Mike Westhoff. And that's a big thing in terms of the special teams going forward. When you have a kicker...
Cam, I don't mean to cut you off, but it looks like Bill's pissed off. That's something unusual. Something is unusual. But anyway, go back.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, I do like the fact that, if you do bring in a kicker that is familiar with Westhoff and Sean Payton, it's a big deal for the long term of, or at least for the special teams. And now, I think what would be certainly something to follow is, of course, is if Blake Group succeeds or doesn't succeed, and then Will Lutz succeeds. So that's going to be a nice little pathway to follow, certainly. And of course, Bill brings in, of course, the Brandon McManus discussion.
Ooh, Gage just jumps in when he wants. Mike, you said you like Lutz and didn't want Maher. It's not that I didn't want Maher, but I think if Sean Payton is happier with Will Lutz, I'd rather go with who Sean Payton's happier with. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh, Gage finally decides to join.
Sorry about that, guys.
Those priorities, man.
Gotta get the breaking news out, man.
We're talking about kickers right now, the trade they made for Will Lutz. Big Mike says it's a conditional 7th. I'm fine with the trade for kicker because we have better luck with undrafted free agents. Is that all we gave up for Will Lutz? Is a conditional 7th?
Yeah. Was it conditional?
I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, because I thought it was just the 7th. I wasn't sure if it was conditional or not. I mean, I'm assuming it's incentive based, obviously, if it's conditional. So,
yeah.
And to Bill's point about we never ever should have gotten rid of McManus. That was not a huge mistake. It was time. It was run his course. We've talked about this before. His ego was writing checks that his leg was not cashing, and for the money that we were paying, that he was being paid, just didn't make sense.
Yeah. And I just think that, once more, like having that kind of familiarity, I think, with Westhoff and with Payton, I think is going to be a big. And actually, if you look at the statistics with Sean Payton, this is probably worth noting. If you actually look at it from the the stuff when he was with Sean Payton, he was about an 83 to 85% kicker, and he has a rather strong leg. And it's worth pointing out that he had a really good camp this year. So it wasn't something that that group won outright. I mean, they actually went and moved on from Will Lutz because of the fact that group was just that much better than Lutz in camp. So Lutz definitely had a good
There you go. I'm pissed at who we let go. Albert O kisses me off the most. Okay, Bill.
You not need to know that. That is TMI information,
you
Bill.
Enjoy that. I know you corrected below it, but I'm not pulling it
now up. He's not as accessible to Bill because now he's cross country, but that's all right.
Oh, that's what it is. But yeah, let's talk about the other trade that was made. There was news that broke that Albert O was getting released. He didn't actually get waived. They actually traded him to the Eagles. I believe it was Albert O and a 7th for a 6th.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, quite the haul.
25.
Yeah. Quite the haul.
Yeah.
That's right.
I mean,
back up the Brinks truck, folks.
Like we all kind of thought that Albert O was gonna get released, right? And then he had that breakout game against the Rams. But that was kind of a showcase show, right? Like them.
But it was even the week before too.
Yeah,
it was even the week before where all of a sudden he was pancaking guys, and he was his whole. It was. I think they were even saying that he'd rounded the corner, and he was finally on fire. So it was really 2 weeks where he was excelling. So it seemed like he had worked his way back into the lineup.
He was stacking days in practice. Okay, cool. Yeah, he was stacking days in practice. He was definitely showcasing improvement, at least from. I hate questioning players' efforts because I understand it takes a special kind of breed to play in the NFL, just in general. But just from a overall effort perspective, it looked like his blocking had really turned a corner. Technique was still somewhat up and down. I think that's ultimately what may have sent him out the door. But overall, man, you could tell this cat was pouring his heart and soul into what he was doing. And it felt like he was really trying to put everything he had into making an impression for this team. And his teammates were extremely supportive of him. After that game against the Rams, man, media was saying that he was getting all kinds of love from his teammates. They were pumping him up. They were dapping him up. So I feel like this is a good landing spot for Alberto. I just wish that things would have maybe come together a little bit sooner than they did for him here in Denver, because Nate Atkins just usurped him on the roster. That's what happened at the end of the day.
And I think that is the and here's where I will actually disagree with George. And I get why he said it, because you don't want to burn any bridges. When you say the kind of things, and this goes into correlation what he talked about, whether it was an Albert thing versus a Nate Atkins thing, and he said, no, it was never about Alberto versus Nate Atkins. Yes, it was. You're not burning any bridges. The reason about doing these types of roster deals, and carrying 4 tight ends is because you feel like this particular player, suits what you're trying to do a little bit better than that player. So I get what he's trying to do, but he just wasn't trying to burn any bridges. And unfortunately for Alberto, Glenn and I talked about it, it's just like he just could never be that consistent guy, unfortunately. And maybe it's this case where it's something we've even forecasted, where they do have a much bigger role with Greg Dulcich this regular season. I know we have Greg Dulcich, #1 fan in the YouTube chat here tonight, so I'm sure he'll enjoy that. But I just think that's it's also worth mentioning that. And I realize this was a Nathaniel Hackett thing possibly, or maybe just the team thing, but let's not forget that Greg Dulcich was, actually like replaced. And when I say replaced Alberto, not even having a single like significant snap, right? I mean, and so coming into week 4, week 5, off of IR, he immediately replaces Alberto Cuebanam. And Alberto Cuebanam was inactive for a couple of those games, or even inactive for all 4 of those games. So he has to be able to stack these days. Now, I do agree, the Philadelphia place is a great spot for him. Frankly, their only successful tight end is Dallas Goedert. Jack Stoll is kind of up and down. Cole Kotter is fascinating, but I mean, you put Dallas Goedert with an Alberto Cuebanam in the future to add some of their more playmakers. He's such a fascinating player with that tight end room and the playmakers that they have on that offense. Now, they're a run-heavy team, so he definitely is going to have to be that type of player to be a lot more, competitive and, show that he's that run-blocking tight end.
Well, now we get to hear the Philly announcers try to figure out Alberto's name for the entire season.
Apparently, Steve Levy, after 3 years, or 2.5 years or whatever, still can't even pronounce Alberto Cuebanam's name.
And he's been calling his games since Missouri.
Yeah. What do you call him? Albert Okuwebunam or Okuibunam, or
at least it's somewhat close.
Baba Booey.
It's not that hard though.
I think he thrives in Philly. They don't need him to block with that line. Just do a 2 tight end set in the red zone.
I think he's in well. I'm happy for his landing spot.
This is funny, by the way, but Albert, if you actually go to his Twitter profile, he literally has his pronunciation in his Twitter profile.
Oh, yeah. Ty's our Johnny on the spot.
Version. I want to hear every version of what they say.
Yeah, every version.
But doesn't the Alberto thing kind of remind you of like the Philip Lindsay thing, right? Like Philip Lindsay was very good at one aspect, and that was running the ball. But when he's on the field, you knew he wasn't very good at catching. So when he's on the field, they're going to run the ball. It's kind of the same thing with Alberto, right? You put Alberto on the field, you know he's not going out to block.
Yes and no. And I'd be curious what Gage's thoughts on this too. But it's like with the tight end position, it's a rare thing because you see a lot of successful receiving threat tight ends that are really good in the NFL. Travis Kelce is a prime example. Mark Andrews is a prime example. Kyle Pitts is up and down due to quarterback play, but he's a prime example. And so you see successful tight ends that are pass catching threats. And frankly, maybe that's why they want to give it to Greg Dulcich, because maybe they like his receiving ability just a little bit more than a guy like Alberto Cuebanam. And so those types of receiving threats are mainstays in the NFL, and they do get paid, right? And they absolutely do get paid. So I don't think it's about a Philip Lindsay thing or not. certainly there was a niche that Philip Lindsay had, but with the tight end position, you're just talking about something that is just very different positionally between running back and tight end.
Absolutely. And I was going to echo that point. Like, we've seen receiving threat tight ends make hay in the NFL, and I feel like Alberto Cuebanam, there could be like a happy medium there where he's showcased that he can look at least competent at times out there in the blocking game. So you may not put him out there on obvious rundowns extremely often. I mean, Philadelphia, they're probably going to have to, just because of some of their lack of personnel at tight end. But yeah, just to echo Cam's point there, I mean, I feel like a lot of big time receiving threat tight ends are able to carve out a role for themselves, and they get paid good money for that role. It's just, I feel like that player here in Denver, like Cam said, is Greg Dulcich.
Yeah.
So are we allowed to jump in with any sort of breaking comments or tweets or anything like that?
Sure.
Yes, please.
So Chris Thomason from the Gazette says, a source said Little Jordan Humphrey will sign with the Broncos practice squad tomorrow. He's a vested veteran who is released and doesn't have to pass through waivers. Humphrey then could be brought up if needed for some early season games.
I didn't know he was gone.
Yeah. Okay. So Okay. So
just might as well get into it.
This is basically what we're talking about. Why Bill is kissing whoever.
Yeah.
So
this is insane.
We just got the tweet right before we went on. Marquez Callaway was waived. Quinn Bailey, Mike Purcell, Fabian Moreau, Lil Jordan Humphrey were all released.
That's right. Where I got Little Jordan Humphrey. I'd forgotten.
Listen, I was hoping Lil Jordan Humphrey was going to make the 53.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it doesn't mean that he won't be elevated to the 53. But right now they have what? Good Lord. Right now they have like
you told me. Oh my God,
four receivers. You did. 4 receivers on the roster right now, and that's
3
including
technically.
Jerry Jeudy, who's hurt.
I haven't seen that much forehead since Peyton Manning is wearing a Denver Broncos uniform.
That was a fun
but it's such an interesting move, I mean, and the thing is, like, Little Jordan Humphrey actually played really well, so much so that, like, are we even sure he's going to stick on the practice squad? I mean, like, I don't know. Like, I think it's pretty clear, though, this team really wants to upgrade that wide receiver room. And if there's one player that I could probably do a quick little shout out for, it would be that Watkins guy from Cleveland that really showed out, led the entire preseason in receiving yards. So I think he's a player that I'm really fascinated with. Now, I think the other obvious connecting of the dots here is something Mike mentioned before we recorded, and that is, what does this mean for KJ Hamler? Like, is KJ Hamler one step, in terms of coming back? Like, is that why they're maybe making the decision of, is Hamler ready to come back? I think it's a very interesting thing. The Purcell thing seems like it's procedural, which is kind of like he's going to be back regardless. But I'm very curious to see what is going on. Marquez Callaway isn't a total surprise. I was a little bit surprised he was actually kept. So I have no idea in terms of this whole wide receiver room what is actually going to be shaking out, because that's a very legitimate case right now. They truly do have 3, and that's because of, you said, Jerry Jeudy being in here possibly for 4 to 6.
I don't want to cut anybody off, but like last week we were talking about, well, they're probably going to have 6, debating on if they're going to have 7. And now we've got 4. And, like, do we know if Marquez Callaway is coming back? Do we know if Lil Jordan Humphrey is even going to make it to the practice squad? We have no idea about KJ Hamler. What are we doing at this point?
Well,
so
that's the fun part, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't
that?
No,
it's not.
Okay, so here's what
right,
I
Bill
believe. I believe. Here's what the tweet from them said. I want to say that Little Jordan Humphrey was released, not waived. So that means this could be one of those procedural moves where they could bring him back tomorrow to put for sure K'Wan Williams, possibly PJ Locke, possibly Riley Moss, or maybe somebody else on injured reserve. Marquez Callaway was waived.
Was waived.
Yeah.
All the rest were released.
the fact that Marquez was waived, that is a little interesting to me because that could be interesting. But the fact that they're going to bring back Humphrey on the practice squad, they could bring him back. I don't know what the hell's going on with
that's what
damn
camera. That's what you get for being late.
Yeah, that's what I get for being late.
So Mike Kliss 2 minutes ago, Broncos' first 53-man roster is 23 offensive players, 27 defensive, 3 specialists, only 4 wide receivers, but source said Lil Jordan Humphrey expected to sign back tomorrow. And then he does have in that tweet, here's the 53-man roster and team's 37 cuts. Purcell, Humphrey, Moreau expected to sign back on Wednesday.
Yeah. So, yeah, it definitely seems procedural.
Did you say Callaway or no?
No.
Oh, okay.
You know what would be fun is since apparently the New Orleans Saints are in the business of helping us out. This was something that was teased by Ben Albright.
Posing.
I know, right?
Start singing.
Yes,
and you're good to go.
But yeah, so with the fact that Callaway was released, I wouldn't be. Albright's mentioned, maybe Traquan Smith, but if you're kind of looking at it like, from just the overall standpoint of like the wide receiver, I would much rather have a young player to groom in this roster than Callaway at this point. So go out and get a guy like a
Watkins. Turn it off and plug it back in. For the love of Pearl.
For the love of Pearl, hold on.
No, it's just I don't know. Like it's so. Cam, you kind of mentioned a wide receiver that you'd be interested in. Are there any ones out there that have been cut that we could bring in, or that you're interested in bringing in other than the one you talked about, or are they trying to save room for like Hamler or something?
It could be both. I mean, I don't know. We just don't know what the player's playing. Watkins was the first player that came to mind because he's been tearing it up. Within preseason. No, Austin Watkins Jr. with Cleveland. He led the entire preseason in receiving yards. I mean, he was ridiculous and quite the surprise the Browns decided to move on from him. But I mean, the Browns wide receiver room actually is not that bad, so it's probably understandable why they maybe want to move on from him. But the Broncos are, and this is probably worth mentioning, the Broncos are 5th in the waiver wire, which is obviously determining based on draft order, not the fact that the Broncos traded that 5th overall pick. So the Broncos are 5th in the waiver wire. So any term of moves that they want to make, they'll be 5th in that pecking order. So Watkins is just the first one that comes to mind. I would be a little surprised, or maybe not as surprised if they want to bring in a veteran, maybe another veteran. So, I mean, and that's where I've been mentioning before, but guys like, Olabisi Johnson, Rashard Higgins, the Colorado Ties, I wouldn't be, upset with by any means.
So Benjamin Albright just tweeted, I put this in my video that I just released, that the Broncos could be looking at Traquan Smith. He's mentioned Traquan Smith a couple of times. They'd have to trade for him, but...
And of course, he's a New Orleans Saint.
Right? Oh, and guess what? I got another New Orleans Saint for you. And I don't know why this would make any sense.
Michael Thomas. Oh.
Another receiving tight end that doesn't... It's basically Greg Dulcich and Alberto Cuebanom in a former New Orleans Saints body. That's what freaking Dan Arnold would be. And those are 2 names that Benjamin Albright threw around after all these moves were just made. So I don't know, man. Since Marquez Callaway was waived, I think he's probably going to come back on the practice squad. Did Kliss say that they're bringing Humphrey back on the active? Because I saw from Chris Thomason that they're bringing him back on the practice. I think.
I saw practice.
I'm hoping they bring him on the active.
Yeah, it was practice, and now Thomason, even five minutes ago, said Quinn Bailey will be on, according to sources, the Broncos' 53-man roster for week 1. So he looks to be one of those vested veterans released who will re-sign with the team. So we talk about some baffling moves, and the Patriots have now left one quarterback on their team. there was even discussion. I think Albert Breer was even talking about today, like on a Dan Patrick appearance, like Bailey Zappi could still get some play, and then he gets dumped. And then Malik Cunningham, that's the name that kind of intrigues me a little bit. I don't know if the Broncos will go with someone that inexperienced to fill some of the spot, but he seems to be a guy that would be a perfect player for Sean Payton. He's quarterback, wide receiver, and kick returner all in one.
Right.
So you're telling me that Bailey Zappi is available?
Yes.
Yeah, he got cut.
Sign him right now.
Basically, the Arizona Cardinals thought they would be like the only team that would cut their entire quarterback room, minus one player. But then the New England Patriots said, "Hold my beer." Like, we got you. We got this. Like,
you go sign Kendall Hinton and have a backup wide receiver quarterback at any point.
So I would. This is and obviously there's a little bit of a connection here, but I mentioned his name before in the pre-draft process. Now I was a little bit surprised to see this particular team draft him, but that was Max Duggan. To the Los Angeles Chargers. Max Duggan, of course, played with TCU. Sean Payton's son, Connor Payton, was a graduate assistant of TCU. So maybe doing a solid, maybe bringing Max Duggan, over to the Broncos is certainly a possibility. But I love the Malik Cunningham idea. Like, if you truly want, and especially for the simple point of like, if we were wanting Trey Lance to be a Bronco or, and use him in that kind of like Taysom Hill-ish role, why not pitch the idea of Malik Cunningham? I mean, Cunningham, DTR, and a few others were one of the stars of preseason. Nathan Rourke was even cut as far as even another possibility. Rourke was cut as well. So I think it would be funny, though, if Ben DiNucci, went and signed with the New England Patriots or some other quarterback, that maybe was ours that ended up, over, in New England, or they wanted to go after Kendall Hinton just for the emergency quarterback.
And normally I'm not this distracted during the show, but I'm just totally paging through some Twitter. But Mike Kliss just put out a correction. Gage, this is kind of in line with what you were talking about. 3 bets expected to sign back to the 53 tomorrow. Mike Purcell, Fabian Moreau, and Quinn Bailey per sources. Lil Jordan Humphrey to practice squad per source. And then Thomason actually said that Tyler Lancaster, a vested veteran who was released by the Broncos, has no plan in place to re-sign with the team at this point. He's wide open on where he could end up.
Okay, so
he's probably pissed that they didn't play him the other night, so it gave the impression he was going to make the team. And meanwhile, they ended up cutting him.
So before we go through all the releases and then take a look at where the roster stands now, I did just for anybody that isn't aware or doesn't know, what is the difference between released and waived?
Gage touched on it earlier. I'll have him touch on it again.
Okay, so if you are released, that means that you are a vested veteran who's accrued at least 5 seasons in the NFL. That means that you don't have to go on the waiver wire. You don't have to be risk getting claimed by another team. You are immediately a free agent and you can re-sign with your old team at a reduced contract or immediately onto the practice squad, or you could sign with another team immediately. Now, if you are waived, that means that you are a player with less than 5 years of experience. And if you go on the waiver wire, you risk getting claimed by any team. Now, the Broncos are 5th on the waiver wire. It's based off of what record you finished with last year. Obviously, we had the 5th worst record, so we are 5th on the waiver wire this year. Arizona is number 1. I mean, with Arizona, they're just trying to tank, so I don't know if they'll be making many claims on the waiver wire. But so if you are a player that's under 4 years of experience, then you will hit the waiver wire, and any team can claim you for up to 24 hours. After that point, then you do become a free agent and you can sign with any team. Sorry, that was a long-winded explanation.
No, it was excellent.
Okay, so reading from the Broncos website that Glenn just sent out to our group chat, the Broncos have released tackle Quinn Bailey, center Kyle Fuller, wide receiver Lil Jordan Humphrey, nose tackle Tyler Lancaster, kicker Brett Maher, corner Fabian Moreau, nose tackle Mike Purcell, and running back Dwayne Washington. So those are all released. And I'm going to annihilate some of these names. I'm just letting you know right now. So Denver has waived linebacker Austin Ahiaki. Did I get it right?
Sure.
Right? Close?
Sure. We'll run with it.
There we go.
Austin A. Yeah.
Austin A. Running back Tyler Beatty. Receiver Michael Bandy. Linebacker Seth Benson. I'm not going to read their positions. Henry Bird. Marquez Callaway. Ben DiNucci. Art Green. Taylor Grimes. That's a little surprising to me. Josh Hammond. Marcus Haynes. Fayon Hicks. Tommy Hudson. Jordan Jackson. DeMontre Jacobs. Tony Jones. Devin Key. Tomasi L. We're going with that. PJ Mustapher. Oh, good God.
A guy. Just call him a guy.
Chisholm.
A jag.
Patrick, Will Sherman, and Montrell Washington. Are there any surprises from those?
Not totally, I would say. I mean,
how about instead of surprises, disappointments? Are there any disappointments in there? Like for me, like Montrell Washington. I know that he hasn't played the greatest, but I was really hoping that he would find something in season 2.
Yeah, if anything, I would say the 2 wide receivers. You mentioned Montrell Washington. So not surprising, but I would just say disappointed with the performance of Montrell Washington and Kendall Hinton. Those are probably the 2 biggest disappointments if you were to look probably off of that list. Kendall Hinton, we had so much hype for, or love for, and everything that he even had, during the COVID game, putting himself out there. When our quarterbacks unfortunately did what they did, and he stepped up and was a quarterback in an emergency game, which ironically was against Sean Payton. But I mean, and ever since that point, he's been endeared, for the fan base. But to his credit, he got better at wide receiver. He became a pretty reliable wide receiver through the years. But the drops were a big thing this year for him. The drops, were big. And Montrell Washington, it's the Deontay Spencer syndrome. I come back to it. It's like, he's a player that in order for you to pursue much larger opportunities, you have to be able to prove your worth on more than just special teams. And when he was on special teams, he muffed punts. He took some punts within the 5-yard line. And we're talking about a player, sadly, that, to what Gage and Glenn saw, from that point, he's not been that great even in camp dating back to that point in time. So it's just, he's just not, to use that very famous term that we've been, using through any of these episodes, he's not been stacking days at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And another one that definitely disappointed me in the latter half of the preseason, or in the training camp, the preseason period, was definitely Marquez Callaway, because he started strong. He really did. And then it felt like he was set to step up after Tim Patrick went down, and it almost just never happened with him. And in the preseason, things just really were kind of rough for him, honestly. So that's probably the main reason why Marquez Callaway didn't make the active roster. So that's one. And then another one that's a little bit outside the box for me is Aaron Patrick. I actually thought he'd make the roster as a special teams contributor, but ultimately it looks like they're going to go with Thomas Incoom over him. I'm happy for Incoom. He looked really good in that Rams game. And he's had some strong days in camp as well. But I'm definitely disappointed, because I thought Aaron Patrick was going to be a key special teams contributor on a unit that obviously needs some guys to step up. So that one's a little bit outside the box, but I'm disappointed in that one for sure.
I think Patrick was in every mock 53 that I saw from the experts, that they had him as the 5th edge rusher, primarily because of the special team prowess. But I'm with you, Gage, on the Callaway deal. He had such a golden opportunity. I mean, he knows the offense. He knows his coach. There were no surprises. At one point when Patrick went down, we were considering him at that stage. We were looking at him as the 3rd receiver in the bunch, and he fluctuated from 3 to 4, based on the week. But to actually now be completely out of it, and in any of the tweets that we're seeing from the insiders, none of them is saying, that there's a plan to bring him back if he clears waivers. So that is an interesting one for sure.
What about the Broncos rolling with 3 running backs and releasing Tony Jones?
At the end of the day, not surprising. I thought that they would roll with 4, but no. When you kind of saw what it was leading toward, no, it wasn't surprising at all. Especially when you saw Washington cut, Tony Jones cut. Once you saw some of those moves roll in, and especially Tyler Beatty. Once you saw Tyler Beatty moved, that's when you're like, okay, the Broncos are truly rolling with 3, and then they're gonna roll with their player, which is the Jaleel McLaughlin, who has earned every single right to be on that 53-man roster, and we don't need to talk about him enough because we spent so much time talking about him. But kudos to him. I mean, he's going to end up having a Darren Sproles type role with this team, and could even find him and possibly a safety valve for Russ. So I mean, it's definitely a good opportunity for him for sure.
Yep. And again, not to beat a dead horse with Jaleel, but as far as Tony Jones is concerned, I feel like he's somebody who's going to be on the practice squad as basically the third guy behind Williams and Pirine as far as like the big power rusher more so. And so that's why I feel like they were confident in sneaking him through onto the practice squad. I don't think there's going to be a team out there that's going to be lining up to poach Tony Jones. He did look good in the preseason, though. I will give him credit, especially in a couple. I mean, maybe not so much in the Arizona game, but in San Francisco, he looked good. I felt like he looked good. And then the Rams game, again, but definitely that San Francisco game, he looked good.
Yeah.
And I was really, pushing or banging the drum for Beatty to be to be the 4th running back on this roster. I was afraid that he wasn't going to get for waivers, and then the Rams game happened, and I know that he scored a touchdown, but it's just one of those things where, I guess maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm having like my, this year's Trinity Benson moment where you get worried about like certain players you just, build up in your head. I do hope that they bring him back on the practice squad and that he's still a part of this team somehow.
Yeah. All right, so let's go through where the 53 stands right now. I've got it pulled up right now. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Or do I need to go bigger? Is that better?
That's better.
Okay. All right, so obviously no surprises with the quarterback, Russell Wilson, Jarrett Stidham. Stidham definitely outplayed Ben DiNucci. I said DiNucci should have been second, but that was after the first game. Okay, leave me alone. Obviously, he was outplayed in game 2 and 3.
To quote George Payton, everything's fluid.
Yeah, everything's fluid.
Yep.
And then running back Javonte Williams, Samaje Perine, and Jaleel McLaughlin. So happy Jaleel made the squad. So happy. I loved him.
Yeah, I mean, nothing else to say. And then, of course, you got Michael Burton. And I think that's the part that's fun that they even decided to keep Nate Atkins. Because, like, that's the versatility with both of them. So there was even some conversation, and I think we had a little bit that, like, they would maybe move on from Burton, and then Atkins would be the fullback. Like, I mean, that was some of the conversation we had been having. But no, they went out and actually got that versatility with Burton, and then now the extra tight end with 4. And maybe that was part of the conversation, and especially something we've had the conversation before about running the 12 or 13 personnel. You know what I mean? Like, having that, and then plus that extra blocker like an Atkins, like that consistent blocker and the capability to at least make catches and, and be an athletic type tight end when he has the ball. Like, and it's very clear when you hear the press conference of George Payton and Sean Payton, like, talk about Atkins, they love him. I think they even said that they were even thinking about drafting him. So yeah, it is definitely something that, was bearing to watch as far as, was it Burton or is it Atkins? They decided to keep both. It's best of both worlds.
And there's your 4 wide receivers. We're not sponsored by Petco, but new low prices.
Time for Mike to get an ad block.
Right, bam, right there. I don't care.
Is this like a Mountain Dew? Is this like a Mountain Dew live read? that no one planned for?
We'll just say it was Gage's cat jump.
Now you just see the label. Yeah, I'm trying to pull a Gage. I got a green screen behind me now. But yeah, little Jordan Humphrey looks like they're going to be signing him back to the team. Okay, so they're talking
Does Gage take that tarp down when it's time to rake leaves and then just put it back up?
Yeah, you got yours through Amazon? I went the expensive way and got mine at Walmart.
Five Below.
Those rollback prices, man.
But yeah, they're talking about potentially putting these players on short-term IR. I thought K1 was season-ending. No?
So apparently what I heard from Andrew Mason on his show on 104.3 The Fan with Cecil Lammy was that this part of this surgery for K1 Williams was to go in there and see how bad the damage was, basically. And so if the damage was bad enough where it would be like a 4 to 6 month recovery, that would have potentially meant season-ending IR. But if the damage is only like half the season, then it's going to be short-term IR for him.
Okay. Going down to tight ends, Adam Troutman, Greg Dulcich, Nate Atkins, and Chris Manhertz. Why is there an asterisk next to his name? Anybody know?
Where is there another asterisk?
I don't know.
Maybe that's a rookie.
Jerry Jeudy, is he hurt?
No, because he would be by
Martin. Yeah, Manhertz he's been injured for a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know why the
Atkins is.
No, Manhertz. He's been hurt. I don't know why there's an asterisk next to.
No, the asterisk is next to Atkins.
Oh, that's probably unrestricted or undrafted free agent, probably, right?
Well, there's one next to Jerry Jeudy.
Well, see, just like I said.
I don't know what's. Yeah.
I'm gonna look at the article and see if I can.
Offensive line: Garrett Bowles, Ben Powers, Lloyd Cushenberry, Quinn Miners, Mike McGlinchey, Cam Fleming, Alex Sure, and then Luke Wattenberg and Alex Forsythe. Sure. Sure.
Learn his name. He's a good player.
Yeah.
Pal Smith. Alex Powell. There we go. We're gonna go with that. Let's see. Placed on short-term injury reserve. That's got to be an injury designation. Placed on short-term injury reserve on Wednesday with a hand injury. He's got an asterisk. It's got to be an injury thing. Because there's one next to K1 too. Defense corners: Pat Surtain, Damari Mathis, Jaquan McMillan, Riley Moss, Tremont Smith, Aseng Bassey, K1 Williams. You've got to think they're going to bring in another one for K1 or no?
Well, I mean, Aseng Bassey is the only nickelback. Not to say, look at this photograph, but I mean, this is where Bradley Roby comes in. I mean, we talked about it even during the offseason. It's like it makes so much sense in the world, aside from the fact he's another New Orleans Saint. That's beside the point. But Vance Joseph is here, who he played under. Sean Payton is here. It just makes all the sense in the world. And once K1 is healthy and once Riley Moss is healthy, you will actually have a much better cornerback room with Roby in the mix once that is, coming into fruition, if it comes into fruition. So I love the idea of Roby, within that mix. So
how old is he now? He's got to be like early 30s, right?
I think so.
Probably 30, yeah. Hold on.
And also,
I'm going with 29.
And also, if you want to go off of
on our Super Bowl team.
I was gonna say, if you want to go off of 29, Faion Hicks was cut, and he wore number 29. It's available.
Like in that article, I'm not seeing any sort of. It's got to be an injury thing. I'm not seeing any.
With PJ Locke on it, K1 Williams on it, and Jerry Jeudy, it's got to be an injury.
So, with Jaquan McMillan, he can play nickel, but he's more been boundary. Working at slot or at boundary, at this offseason. So I almost said slot. It's like nickel slot, same freaking thing. Like, the nickel's working in the slot. He's working at nickel, but he's also working at slot too. It's like, no, he's been working at boundary. He's been working mostly at boundary, but he can work at the nickel in the slot position. But also, I mean, Kareem Jackson, he's been utilized in the slot as basically like a dime backer, also just hanging down around the line of scrimmage. being that thumper that K-Jack's always going to be. So that's something we need to factor in there too. I mean, K-Jack, he's in the safety category, but I don't think they're going to be using him much as a deep range safety. He's just going to be mostly a dime backer that's going to be designated to go in there and lay the wood on people.
Yeah, and if we go to the safety room, well, actually, I will say that the cornerback room, if there is a surprise of who they kept, it would be Tremont Smith. In the cornerback room that they decided to keep him. And maybe, and it's interesting. I heard Kliss talk about it in the sense of they maybe want to use him as a punt returner and kickoff returner. Look, he's capable of that. He showed that with the Texans. But, Gage knows this, and even in the preseason, they've really not advertised him as a kickoff returner or punt returner at all, like in camp or even in preseason. So it's a little bit surprising that you would see it, now where they're going to, so maybe he's one of those moves that you kind of see where they bring in a player and he's like that very obvious cut that you see. Maybe he falls in line with that. But as far as the safety room, the one guy I will say that I'm really glad they cut, and I know he had a very disappointing preseason, is the guy in the safety room, and that is J.L. Skinner. The one thing I will say is, I'm glad they kept him. I just know that even with the fact he had an injury, we're talking about a player that, despite that injury, would have been a really high-end pick. And so the fact that they're probably holding on to him shows that they believe in that type of player. And so when we're talking about players that can play that nickel slot and everything, I would not be surprised if Skinner has some sort of role like that kind of carved in, where he's that thumper, along with, some of the Kareem Jacksons of, the world, and maybe even a Caden Stearns in some situations.
Well, another thing that Kliss mentioned in his visit in the booth in the third preseason game was that Tremont has a guaranteed contract of about $2.5 million, and he thought he would be making the team just based on the fact that they would be already paying him that money. To me, that doesn't seem like enough money to make a decision on a guy that really hasn't had the impact that I've felt like he would when he first came in. So if that's a money move, that really does surprise me.
Mm-hmm.
So once again, looking at safeties: Justin Simmons, Kareem Jackson, Caden Stearns, Delaren Turner, J.L. Skinner, PJ Locke. And Glenn earlier today was like, quote me, the Broncos might release Kareem Jackson.
I did not say quote me.
You look like an idiot now.
That I did not say quote me. I said I just had a vision last night that what if the Broncos moved on from Kareem Jackson? I didn't say quote me.
It's like, get it right, Mike.
I'm just distracted by the new low prices at Petco. Leave me alone.
So is that kid?
I don't know. It's cutie. Inside linebacker: Josie Jewell, Alex Singleton, Drew Sanders, Justin Sternad.
That was the easiest position to predict.
Yeah,
right. Seriously.
Justin Sternad surprises me a little bit, though.
He's actually played well.
I'm a fan of Sternad, though.
Oh, he's a great special teamer too, Mike.
Yeah.
Who would you put in his place?
Okay, Mr. Kareem Jackson out on the Broncos. Shut up.
What? And let's not forget, Jonas Griffith was that kind of guy that was really an impact on special teams, and Sternad is that guy now in terms of the impact on special teams. So, I mean, and let's not, let's kind of keep it, with what it is. Like, he played really well in this preseason. He didn't get a lot of love from us specifically on any show, but he was a guy that kind of was flying under the radar and having a pretty solid preseason and playing pretty well. So it's not a surprise by any means.
No,
agreed.
What is now the Denver Saints? Like, I get that, but at the same time, like, Tony Jones isn't on the team anymore. He was the same. Marquez Callaway is not on the team anymore.
It still counts. I'm just saying.
But they're not on the team anymore.
It still counts.
Still counts.
Defensive line: DJ Jones, Zach Allen, Elijah Garcia. Yes! Matt Henningsen and Jonathan Harris. I'm assuming Mike Purcell will be added onto that.
Yeah. the biggest winner. I mean, the two biggest winners, if you will, if you're probably going off of this, of the entire 53 is, of course, McLaughlin and Elijah Garcia. I mean, I think once they decided to not keep Tyler Lancaster, it felt like maybe that was one of the moves that really signaled that they're really going to go in that different direction. You know, that maybe that they're really going to keep Elijah Garcia. And I think that, you know, that was a really good thing. And even for Matt Henningsen, that was a really good bode well for Henningsen as well, who, if you were to talk about two and maybe one of the biggest winners too of that defensive line, it was Henningsen and Garcia, because both of them played really well together. And I think that if you're talking about depth and you want to do something on the defensive line, that bodes really well for your depth. If you want them to work really well together, you know, in stints, in terms of, you know, substituting for some players.
Looking at outside linebacker, Randy Gregory, Jonathan Cooper, Frank Clark, Nick Benito, Thomas Incoom, and that is not including Baron Browning. Is he still on PUP or is he on short-term IR?
He is on the puppy list.
Okay.
Puppy list.
And I did notice, I was looking around at different depth charts, and ESPN has Randy Gregory as a starter on one side and Frank Clark on the other.
So Mike Kliss had it a little differently.
Wouldn't he?
So, yeah, Mike Kliss had it a little differently. He's got Jonathan Cooper starting on first and second down, and then Frank Clark being a rotational guy on third down, and then Nick Benito figuring to fit in there somewhere as well, too. But it looks like Jonathan Cooper has earned that starting role, man. So good for him.
8-0. Good for him, man. I mean,
8-0.
So I will say this goes back to our Aaron Patrick discussion. You know, I think maybe one of the reasons why they decided to move on with a guy like Patrick it was probably because they felt so good about Incoom and what he could do. His traits are incredible. If you guys go watch some of the stuff he did in preseason, it's great. And so I think that he's a player that they're clearly, you know, banking on and probably want to develop him. And also we're probably afraid that they were going to lose him too, you know. But I will say I would not be afraid at all to bring someone in the edge room. I know Incoom is unproven and he's got those traits, but I would definitely be for bringing some of those players that are edge, you know, those types of players that you can be able to contribute, you know, on the outside. So I'm speaking, of course, you know, really positively about Incoom, but I would not be, you know, upset one bit if they brought in some more players from there into that room.
So I don't know if you can see it in the description under the OLBs, but it does reference that Incoom received $200,000 guaranteed as an undrafted signee, and that was the biggest upfront money that the Broncos gave any of the undrafted guys that they brought in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Payton says they're going to carry 2 more outsides on the practice squad. Special teams. Yay! Where'd it go? There's nothing there. Screw special teams.
Kickers are people too, man.
Seriously.
But no,
it's long snapper.
So it's Will Lutz as the kicker. It's Marvin Mims as the kick and punt returner. And who's the long snapper?
Mitch Fraboni.
Jabroni.
Mitch Jabroni.
Mitch Jabroni. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have any complaints. Hopefully Mike Purcell comes back. Hopefully we get a little Jordan Humphrey back. But I don't have any complaints.
No, I mean, none really. And it's worth pointing out that just for you know, in terms of the people that are watching this and just understanding, the 53-man roster that you see today may not be or will be the 53-man roster that you see on week 1. There will be some changes, some frustrating changes. I mean, we went through it with Brandon Johnson last year, how frustrating that was. But he kind of came back, right? I mean, we weren't sure if he would be back, but he did come back, and obviously there was an injury associated with that, but he did come back. But yeah, this is not set in stone. It is not the actual set in stone and engraved of like what's actually going to be there, you know, come week 1.
Yeah.
Yep. And now look at where Brandon Johnson's come, man. He's a key contributor on this team.
Or 3.
I mean, I got him as 3.
Yeah.
So,
which means they should be cutting him in about 4 seconds.
Cam, I don't know if you talked about this earlier. The Cardinals waived Rashard Lawrence. He was their starting nose tackle for the last couple seasons.
Yeah.
No, he was talking about Rashard, the former CSU receiver. Talk to me.
Hollywood Higgins.
Rashard Higgins, yeah.
There's just a wink on that one because he was part of Vance Joseph's defense.
I think it was noteworthy that Rap Sheet mentioned that in his tweet. I think we need to pay attention to that just a little bit.
Yep. Let's see here. I'm not seeing really any other breaking news. You guys got anything?
No, I keep looking. I'm not seeing anything.
I got.
It's like it's kind of settled in.
We're moderating it like it's Peyton Manning watch all over again with all the moves that have been happening.
Benjamin Albright's confirming it's practice squad for Little George. But other than that, I got nothing.
Yeah.
And Steve has a wish for all of us.
Steve has a wish for all of us. I hope so.
I think it
not a whole lot I can do about it.
Last year was rock bottom.
Yeah, I think it will be. And by the way, this is a fun little nugget, and I know Glenn saw this, but did you guys get a chance to see James Palmer's recap about Russell Wilson that he shared yesterday? It wasn't much, except for like the last half second. Like the last half second clip that Palmer mentioned where he basically said something that, was that Russ had been running, this year way more than last year, which was not something that the coaching staff ever even wanted in the cards. They did not want Russell Wilson running the ball. So I thought that was
the current coaching staff or last year's? Last
year's Hackett coaching staff did not want Russell Wilson running the ball, whereas this year they want to make sure that Russ is that off-schedule, off-script quarterback. So it just basically confirmed everything that we know, that he's looking really well. So I thought that last half-second nugget by Palmer was something that, was, hopefully people, took notice of. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Indeed.
Sorry, I was reading a tweet from Schefter about Jonathan Taylor. The Colts did not find fair value offer for Jonathan Taylor, so he's not being traded today. Looks like he's going to go on the PUP or stay on the PUP and is going to miss the first 4 games of the season. So Jags, Texans, Ravens, and Rams. But I love how, they are devaluing him by not paying him, but then they're like, oh, we want a first-round pick to trade him.
Yeah.
Pick one.
Germ Irsay at his finest.
That's right. Germ Irsay at his finest.
Germ Irsay.
It sucks, too, because I actually like Chris Ballard.
Well, and again,
sidelines with the play sheet. Last preseason game.
Yeah. Well, and we don't need to beat a dead horse on this, but it's like, how stupid do you have to be? He's your best offensive player, and we said it before. It's like the best thing aside from a tight end to help your young quarterback is a running game, and no better player to ever do that than Jonathan Taylor. I mean, he's had 2 great years. He actually had an MVP campaign, but no, we're going to screw him over, and make it so difficult for him. So Germ Irsay at his finest. But we all know at some point, a Wisconsin player will be a Bronco at some point. Melvin Gordon, Monte Ball, Russell Wilson. And we also know that a Colt grows up to be a Bronco.
Yeah. All right, I think that about
Cam just went full-on bumper sticker on us there.
Right? We need to make that merch going into the shop right there. But I think that's going to about do it. We don't have anything else to cover. I think we got it all. Covered the roster, covered the cuts. Williams, couple players, 1 or 2 draft.
He's talking about trading Javonte for Jonathan Taylor.
No, thank you.
Good.
Yeah, no.
My gosh, I can't even imagine how unpopular that would be.
Yeah.
Oh, fans would revolt.
That's going to go nuts.
Right, like not signing Jaleel McLaughlin or keeping him on the roster. Revolt. That's what would have happened. But we do want to thank everybody that joined us in the chat. We appreciate all the chats. Appreciate all the views. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, turn on notifications. And if you haven't checked out all of the shows on the MHRT network, please do. We have, 10 shows now? 9 shows? We cover all like Avalanche, Broncos. We cover game days on the network. And then you've got the new show with John Kay and his co-host. I forget their name, sorry. Where they cover Colorado. They cover University. They cover Colorado State, and they cover Air Force. So make sure you check that out as well. We are done for the night. Make sure you catch us tomorrow on the PSF app if you want to hear more from us. We love you. We love Broncos country. We love the Broncos. Peace out.
Even when you feel low, you can still go. Even when you feel slow, you can still go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go. Go, go.